Ancient Rome is by far one of history's most astonishing examples of urban civilization. But with over 1 million people crammed into the city, the challenge of managing its staggering daily load of waste, estimated at 50,000 pounds of human excrement, is nothing short of shocking.
It really is. The scale is almost unimaginable today.
The answer lies in a mix of engineering genius and practical horror. The Romans built vast sewer systems, like the Cloaca Maxima, which still functions today, and lined their streets with public latrines.
Absolutely brilliant engineering for its time. But the reality, well, it was messy.
Yet, these toilets were communal, often shared by dozens, and equipped with sponges on sticks that everyone used, spreading bacteria and disease with each wipe.
That communal sponge, the Trisorium,
Yeah.
yeah, that's usually the detail that makes people shudder. And for good reason.
Despite advanced aqueducts and drainage, many residents lived above filth, their waste tossed into the streets or flushed into overcrowded sewers, while vermin and parasites thrived in the poorly maintained public spaces.
Exactly. That contrast is key. Incredible infrastructure on one hand, and just, well, squalor on the other, often side by side.
The city's remarkable infrastructure masked, but never fully conquered, a daily struggle with filth and infection. Welcome to the History Deep Dive. So when you picture a Roman public toilet, what truly comes to mind? Are we talking about anything remotely close to the private, solitary experience we know today, or was it something profoundly different?
Oh, profoundly, shockingly different. I mean, forget everything you know about modern restrooms. Cast aside any notion of privacy.
Okay.
Imagine walking into a large, sometimes quite grand, hall. Along the walls, you'd see this remarkably long stone bench, maybe marble, intricately carved with keyhole-shaped openings.
Right.
But these weren't individual cubicles. No, these openings were often right next to each other, like shoulder to shoulder. You could have anywhere from 20 to 50 or even more people all sitting side by side.
50 people
Yeah.
together.
Or more, and some of the larger ones, absolutely. No stalls, no doors, no partitions whatsoever. You literally sat shoulder to shoulder, sometimes knee to knee with your fellow citizens as you attended to your most personal needs. It was an entirely shared, very public experience.
Wow. Okay, so it wasn't just about functionality then. It sounds like these spaces took on a much larger social role. Could you elaborate on what daily life might have been like in one of these communal facilities?
Exactly. That's what's so fascinating. Far from being merely utilitarian, these public latrines were surprisingly vibrant social hubs. You know, they often functioned as a kind of other forum.
Another forum, like people just hung out there.
Pretty much, people didn't just rush in and out, they lingered. Imagine the scene. A senator might be, discussing the latest political maneuvering with a merchant sitting right beside him.
While doing their business.
While doing their business, yeah. A group of friends might be exchanging the day's gossip. We even know that business deals were sometimes conducted in these highly unusual settings.
That's incredible.
And get this, we have archaeological evidence of game boards, like four checkers or backgammon, carved directly into the stone seats themselves.
Seriously, games.
Yes. It suggests people would spend extended periods there, maybe enjoying a bit of entertainment or a friendly competition while they, well, did what they needed to do and socialized. It truly offers a window into a Roman culture that had a very different perception of public and private life. Shared communal spaces were just the norm, even for intimate bodily functions.
And considering the Romans' love for grandeur, were these rather functional spaces also adorned with beauty? Was there an aesthetic to these necessities?
Oh, absolutely. The Romans were masters of integrating art and architecture into pretty much every aspect of their urban landscape, and public latrines were no exception.
So they weren't just bare stone rooms.
Far from it. Many of these facilities were architecturally elaborate, designed not just for practicality, but also for visual appeal. You might have seen exquisite mosaic floors underfoot, maybe depicting playful sea creatures or intricate geometric patterns, all designed to be appreciated while you sat there.
Mosaics on the floor of a toilet.
Oh, okay. And the walls were often adorned with painted frescoes, perhaps showing scenes from mythology or just pleasant decorative motifs to create a more, let's say, agreeable environment. Sometimes there were even statues placed in niches. Statues, turning a basic necessity into something akin to a public art gallery. It's a curious Roman trait, this desire to beautify even the most mundane aspects of daily life. It really puts a different spin on what public art meant to them, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And what about the actual, flushing mechanism? They had running water, right? How did that work to manage the waste from so many people?
Yes, and this was truly a feat of hydraulic engineering for its time. Beneath those stone benches, a continuous stream of fresh water flowed through a deep channel,
Okay, constantly running.
constantly running. This water, typically diverted from the city's magnificent aqueduct system, we'll probably talk more about those later, served to constantly carry away waste. As someone used the facility, the waste would drop into this flowing channel and be whisked away, ideally towards one of the city's main sewers.
So that was the Roman flush, basically.
That was the Roman flush, exactly. Designed to keep the latrine relatively clean and, perhaps more importantly, to reduce the buildup of, well, overwhelming odors. Though how effective it always was is something scholars still debate.
I can imagine. And who used these? Was it just certain classes?
No, these facilities were generally open to everyone, men, women, although some might have been segregated. We're not entirely sure on the specifics everywhere. Rich, poor, often without any shame. It was simply an accepted part of daily public life. And that constant movement of water also helped deter insects and vermin, which was another bonus.
All right, now for the detail that truly fascinates and perhaps horrifies most people. No toilet paper as we know it. So how exactly did people clean themselves after using these communal facilities? And how effective was their method for actual hygiene?
Right, you've hit on perhaps the most infamous detail of Roman sanitation, the notorious tersorium.
The tersorium.
This was a sea sponge, often surprisingly soft apparently, attached to the end of a wooden stick. After using the toilet, this was the primary tool for personal hygiene.
A sponge on a stick.
Okay. But here's the kicker. What is genuinely shocking and frankly horrifying by today's standards is that this sponge was communal.
Communal, wait, like shared.
Shared,
Right.
exactly. It sat in a bucket of water, or sometimes in a smaller channel of continuously flowing water that ran along the front of the seats and was reused by many people throughout the day.
So let me get this straight. You'd use it, rinse it in a shared bucket or trough, and then the next person would just pick it up and use it.
That's pretty much the grim reality, yes. It was precisely that. While the water in the bucket or channel sometimes contained vinegar or salt intended, perhaps, as a disinfectant, or maybe just to mask odors.
But did that even work?
Well, evidence from scientific analysis of ancient human remains and latrine deposits strongly suggests it was rarely effective against microscopic threats. I mean, the very idea of a shared sponge is a highly efficient mechanism for spreading intestinal diseases like dysentery, salmonella, whipworm, roundworm, literally from one person to the next. The Romans, despite valuing visible cleanliness, a wiped seat, a flowing channel, they had absolutely no understanding of germ theory, none at all. They couldn't comprehend the invisible world of bacteria, viruses, and parasites that undermine their efforts. They cleaned what they could see, but the microscopic realm was completely unknown to them.
Was there any alternative for those who could afford it, or was everyone, from commoner to elite, stuck with the communal sponge? That just sounds awful.
It does, doesn't it? Well, while sharing was the common practice for the majority, especially in public latrines, individuals of higher social standing often had alternatives. The wealthy elite might have carried their own personal tersorium when traveling, or maybe used personal wool or linen rags that were cleaned privately by servants.
Okay, that's slightly better.
Slightly. There's also evidence of small jugs of water, sometimes called ursioli, used for splashing clean, that offered a more private, if perhaps less thorough, method.
Splashing. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other options?
Well, yes, some rather cruder alternatives involved using pottery shards, often from broken amphorae. These were called pesoi, or smooth seashells.
Pottery shards. Ouch.
Exactly, you use them to scrape clean. While maybe effective in removing visible waste, the abrasive nature and the potential for injury are certainly unsettling. The very idea of reusing discarded pottery for personal hygiene highlights the resourcefulness, but also the harsh realities of daily life for many. So you see, this range of practices really highlights a vast social divide, even in something as basic as personal hygiene.
It really does. Now, you mentioned the aqueducts. It seems the Romans were true masters of moving water. Their aqueducts are legendary, and for good reason. Can you truly convey the sheer scale of these water systems and how they supplied a city of over 1 million people?
Oh, the scale was truly monumental. It really set them apart from virtually every other ancient civilization. The city of Rome alone received an astounding daily influx of water. Estimates vary, but we're talking somewhere between, say, 1.1 to maybe even 7 million cubic meters of water every single day.
7 million cubic meters. How much is that?
It's nearly 300 million gallons every day. To put that into perspective, that's enough water to fill hundreds and hundreds of Olympic-sized swimming pools daily.
Wow. And where did it all come from?
This wasn't just local well water. No, it was primarily channeled from distant Apennine Mountains, some sources as far as 60 miles away, through this magnificent network of aqueducts. The Aqua Claudia, for instance, a colossal undertaking built in the mid-1st century AD, stretched some 43 miles. Much of it ran underground, but it also crossed valleys on those iconic towering arches we picture, bringing in an immense volume of fresh, clean water, 247.
And a significant portion of that incredible water supply went directly to public sanitation rather than just drinking water, correct?
Absolutely. A substantial segment of this immense daily water supply was channeled directly to the public baths, the thermae, the latrines, and various public fountains. This provided that continuous flow necessary for their flushing systems within the latrines and the constant replenishment for the vast public baths.
So that constant current under the latrine seats was vital.
It was vital. It prevented stagnation and significantly helped to manage odors by constantly moving waste out of immediate view. But, there was also this brilliant pragmatic approach to water conservation, even with such abundance.
Really? How so?
Well, sometimes water that had already been used in the public baths, which was still relatively clean, having just rinsed off bathers, was cleverly recycled. It would then flow through nearby latrines before finally being discharged into the main sewers.
Oh, sort of second use.
Exactly, a cascading system. It demonstrates a really advanced, integrated approach to water management. Even with such an abundant supply, they sought efficiency and maximized the utility of every drop. This system of continuous flow was absolutely core to Roman urban hygiene, allowing for those widespread public amenities that would just be impossible otherwise.
Okay, so that covers the public side. But beyond those impressive public latrines, which clearly served a large part of the population, how did ordinary Romans, especially those living in those crowded multi-story apartment buildings, manage their personal waste? Because not everyone had access to those grand public facilities right in their building.
Right, that's a crucial distinction, and it reveals a much, much grittier side of Roman daily life. For the vast majority of Romans, particularly those living in the cramped, multi-story apartment buildings, the insulae, some reaching 5 or 6 stories high.
So like ancient apartment blocks.
Pretty much. For them, private in-house toilets connected to the city's sewer system were an extreme rarity, an almost unheard of luxury. Most homes simply lacked the complex plumbing infrastructure required for such a setup.
What did they do?
Instead, chamber pots were ubiquitous, absolutely everywhere. These ceramic, maybe bronze, or even precious silver vessels for the wealthy, depending on social status, were the standard solution for bodily functions within the home. They provided a convenient, immediate answer. But then, of course, came the pressing and often rather unsavory question of disposal.
And what was the common disposal method for these chamber pots? I've heard some rather infamous stories about that.
You've certainly heard correctly. The disposal of chamber pot contents was often, a swift toss out the window into the street below, especially after dark.
Straight out the window, onto the street.
Straight out the window. It was not a pleasant experience for anyone walking below, let me tell you. And it was a practice officially discouraged, even punished by law. There were fines for injuring someone with your waste, but these laws were clearly difficult to enforce. Imagine walking down a narrow, unlit Roman street at night, constantly having to be aware of what might be raining down from above.
Oh my gosh, no thank you.
This practice contributed significantly to the pervasive smell and visible filth in the back alleys and less affluent neighborhoods of the city. Now, more considerate Romans, or perhaps those in buildings with better communal arrangements, might empty their pots into large communal collection jars called dolium, placed at the foot of stairwells or in courtyards.
Okay, like a communal bin, almost.
Sort of, yes. These large pottery vessels would then be periodically emptied by designated workers. And then there was also the repurposing of broken amphorae, those large pottery jars used for wine and oil. They were often embedded in alleyways or courtyards to serve as makeshift urinals or smaller waste collection points. A practical form of waste recycling, however unglamorous. This was a direct, often crude, and frequently unsanitary method of dealing with daily domestic waste, standing in stark contrast to the grandeur and flowing water of the public latrines.
It sounds like an incredible volume of waste was produced daily. But this waste, particularly human waste, wasn't just disposed of. It was actually considered a valuable commodity. That sounds truly bizarre to our modern sensibilities.
It absolutely does, doesn't it? But for the Romans, it was an incredibly practical, albeit stinky, cornerstone of their urban economy. Human urine, for instance, was a surprisingly vital industrial ingredient.
Urine? What for?
Well, primarily due to its ammonia content. It was used extensively by fullers, the ancient equivalent of dry cleaners, to wash and whiten woolen togas. Wait, they wash clothes in urine?
They did. Imagine this. Large vats of stale urine would be collected, often from public collection points or those repurposed amphorae, and men would actually jump up and down in these vats to agitate the clothes, essentially acting as living washing machines.
It is, wow.
The ammonia acted as a powerful detergent, cutting through grease and dirt, and the urine helped bleach the wool, making it whiter and brighter. And beyond fabric care, Roman writers like Pliny the Elder even attest to urine being used as a mouth rinse to whiten teeth.
No, a mouth rinse.
Yes, a practice that is certainly shocking to us now.
Whitening teeth with urine and washing clothes in it. What other uses did they find for this, from our perspective, rather unpleasant resource?
Well, beyond personal and fabric care, urine's chemical composition, particularly its nitrogen and phosphorus content, made it an excellent fertilizer. The Roman writer Columella, a leading expert in agriculture, specifically noted its particular benefit for growing pomegranates, claiming it made them juicier and tastier.
Pomegranates fertilized with urine.
Lovely.
And it was also used in more unconventional applications, for example, in veterinary medicine. Columella suggested giving tepid urine to sheep suffering from bile or lung issues, or even applying it to sick bees and birds. So it was truly seen as a versatile medicinal and agricultural resource, not just a waste product. And it wasn't just urine that was valuable. Both urine and animal and sometimes human feces were critical for tanning leather.
Canning leather, too. Ow.
Soaking animal pelts in urine helped to remove hair and flesh, preparing them for the tanning process. Then, ground feces with their bacterial enzymes were used to soften the hides, making them more supple and valuable for clothing, armor, and other goods. This process, while highly effective, added significantly to the pervasive odors of Roman industrial areas, often concentrated in specific districts downwind of the city.
So some parts of the city must have just smelled awful.
Unbelievably awful, I imagine. And human feces, also known as night soil, was a commodity actively collected and sold by stercorari, literally poop collectors.
Poop collectors, that was a real job.
A real and essential job. These individuals would collect human waste from private cesspits, public collection points, and those dolium jars we mentioned. They'd then transport it to farmers outside the city for use as fertilizer. This was a significant form of ancient recycling, transforming urban waste into agricultural bounty and contributing to the city's food supply.
But wasn't that dangerous? Using raw sewage on food crops.
Exactly. And this is a critical public health paradox. This practice, particularly when unprocessed feces were used, was a significant hazard. Pathogens from the waste parasite eggs, bacteria could easily survive and spread to crops, reinfecting the population through the food chain. This created a continuous cycle of disease.
So the recycling was actually making them sick.
In many ways, yes. This stinky economy vividly demonstrates the Romans' impressive resourcefulness and pragmatism, but also their fundamental lack of understanding of microbiology. Even Emperor Vespasian, known for his practical nature, famously recognized the economic value. When his son Titus expressed disgust over the tax Vespasian levied on public urinals and the collection of urine, Vespasian reportedly held up a coin earned from the tax and asked his son, "Does it stink?" Which of course led to the famous saying, pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. It was a clear statement that the economic benefit outweighed any perceived unpleasantness.
Money doesn't stink. Okay, so with all this waste collection and management, who was responsible for this incredibly unpleasant work? It sounds like a truly thankless, dangerous, and utterly reviled job that no one would want.
You're absolutely right. It was precisely that. Grueling, hazardous, and socially demeaning. The monumental task of managing Rome's staggering daily waste fell primarily to the lowest strata of society: enslaved people, indentured servants, and low-wage workers. They were the invisible gears of the Roman machine, performing tasks that were essential for urban functioning but universally avoided by others.
Like the stercorari, the poop collectors.
Exactly. The stercorari, the night soil men, collected human waste from private cesspits and communal collection points. This was often a job performed under the cover of darkness, partly to avoid the heat, but also the public eye, due to the intense odor and social stigma associated with it. While it was universally reviled, it was also absolutely essential for urban functioning, and these workers were in fact compensated for this distasteful labor, indicating its indispensable nature. They would often use basic tools like shovels, buckets, handcarts, navigating the city's streets, often by moonlight, to transport the waste.
And the people who had to go into the actual sewers, that must have been even worse, an unimaginable nightmare.
Incredibly so. The sewer workers, often convicts or enslaved individuals assigned to the harshest forms of labor, faced unimaginably dangerous conditions. They would crawl through dark, confined, noxious, and often collapsing tunnels to clear blockages, perform maintenance, maybe retrieve lost items.
The dangers must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely imagine. Methane gas buildup leading to explosions, the constant threat of being overcome by toxic fumes or drowning in sudden rushes of water or sewage, the presence of rats and other vermin, and the risk of structural collapses within the ancient, often unstable network. This was a literal underground army battling urban decay, dealing with unimaginable filth and constant peril. It was quite literally a job you would not wish on your worst enemy, often a death sentence for those condemned to it. And even in the public latrines themselves, enslaved attendants were responsible for the daily cleaning. This included ensuring the water channels were clear, managing those shared trissorium buckets, and generally maintaining the facility's appearance. For the elite, slaves would attend to private latrines in their villas, emptying chamber pots, and even presenting the sponge or linen rags for personal use. These individuals, despite their crucial role in public health and daily convenience, were often anonymous, their grueling, hazardous labor forming the unseen foundation of Roman society's comfort and cleanliness. The success, such as it was, of Rome's waste management system relied entirely on this constant, often brutal, human labor.
Despite all this sophisticated infrastructure and the immense human effort, it sounds like Roman cities were still deeply unhealthy, rife with disease. That seems completely counterintuitive given their reputation for sanitation. What does the scientific evidence tell us about this hidden epidemic?
It is, isn't it? It's one of the most surprising and sobering discoveries from modern analysis of ancient human remains in waste. Despite all their advanced infrastructure, the aqueducts, the baths, the sewers, the scientific analysis of ancient human waste, particularly from latrine deposits and burials,
What does it show?
it actually shows that parasite infection increased significantly during the Roman Empire compared to prior periods like the Iron Age. That's a truly shocking outcome for a society so renowned for its sanitation and cleanliness. People were just riddled with intestinal parasites. Whipworm, roundworm, dysentery were endemic.
So more parasites than before. How is that possible?
It seems counterintuitive, right? And it wasn't just internal parasites. Ectoparasites like fleas and lice were just as common as in populations that didn't bathe frequently, which again is quite unexpected for a society that valued bathing so much.
So their attempts at cleanliness, in some ways, paradoxically made things worse. How could that possibly be the case?
Exactly, it seems so. Take the communal bathhouses, for example, intended for cleanliness, relaxation, social interaction. Well, ironically, they became highly effective breeding grounds for parasites and bacteria.
The baths. But they were about getting clean.
You'd think so. But the warm shared water was often not changed frequently enough. Imagine hundreds of people using the same pools daily. A scum of human filth, skin cells, oils, cosmetics would accumulate. This created an ideal, warm, moist environment for microbial nasties and parasite eggs to thrive and spread rapidly among the bathers. Without understanding microscopic dangers, it was just a recipe for transmission.
And the fertilizer.
Right, the practice of using unprocessed human excrement as fertilizer, which we discussed, that directly led to the reinfection of the population. Parasite eggs can remain viable in feces for extended periods. When spread on crops, they could easily contaminate the food, get ingested, and infect new hosts, creating this continuous vicious cycle of disease.
And I've heard that garum, their ubiquitous fish sauce, was also a culprit in spreading some of these diseases.
Yes, that's another fascinating and rather unappetizing detail. Fish tapeworms specifically seem to have spread widely throughout the empire, and a strong suspect is that incredibly popular Roman fermented fish sauce called garum.
How did that happen?
Well, garum was made by fermenting pieces of fish, intestines, salt, and various seasonings under the hot Mediterranean sun. It relies on natural bacterial action. The critical point is that garum was never heated or cooked during its preparation.
So any parasites in the fish.
Exactly. Any parasite eggs present in the raw fish could potentially survive the fermentation process. Then, this sauce was bottled up and distributed throughout the vast Roman trade network, infecting people who consumed it across the entire empire. It highlights how a core element of their diet and cuisine inadvertently became a vector for widespread parasitic infections.
So it all comes back to not understanding germs.
Ultimately, yes. The Romans simply lacked an understanding of germ theory. They could perceive and value visible cleanliness, a white seat, a flowing channel, a scrubbed body, but they were completely unaware of the microscopic world of bacteria, viruses, and parasites that constantly undermine their best efforts and turn some of their innovations into silent vectors for disease. Their impressive engineering provided sanitation infrastructure, but their lack of scientific understanding left them incredibly vulnerable.
Let's talk about the Cloaca Maxima again. It's such an incredible feat of engineering, truly an icon of Roman ingenuity. How did this grand sewer function, and what was its ultimate impact on the Roman environment?
Right. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's greatest sewer. It is indeed a monumental achievement, a real testament to Roman engineering brilliance. But interestingly, it actually began its life not as a sewer in the modern sense, but as an open-air canal, probably way back in the 6th or 7th century BCE.
An open canal, really?
Yes. Its primary purpose back then was quite practical, to drain the marshy, low-lying ground between Rome's hills, especially the area that would eventually become the famous Roman Forum. This drainage was essential to make the land habitable and suitable for building public assembly areas and temples.
So it started as a simple drainage ditch and then evolved significantly over time into this massive subterranean structure.
Precisely. Over centuries, as Rome grew in size, population, and complexity, the Cloaca Maxima was progressively expanded, deepened, and eventually vaulted over with stone. It transformed from an open ditch into this massive subterranean river carrying waste.
And it's still partly there.
It's astounding, but yes. Sections of it still function today in some capacity, after 2.5 millennia, forming part of modern Rome's drainage system. In places, it was incredibly large, big enough for a maintenance worker to walk upright, or even for a small boat to navigate for inspection and cleaning. Though, again, imagine that job.
I'd rather not.
This vast conduit, along with an increasingly complex network of smaller, branching sewers, became the primary artery for carrying away waste from the public latrines, the baths, industrial workshops, and street-level drains, effectively moving the waste away from immediate urban areas.
That sounds incredibly efficient for moving waste away from the city center.
Right.
But where did all that waste actually go once it left the city? What was its ultimate environmental fate?
Ah, yes. And here's the sort of shocking truth that tempers our admiration for Roman engineering. This magnificent system, this feat of construction, it ultimately emptied straight into the Tiber River, just downstream from the city.
Straight into the river.
Yeah.
Untreated.
Straight into the river, untreated. While it successfully channeled waste away from immediate view, making the city itself appear cleaner, it simply concentrated the problem and dumped it back into the very river. And this was the same river that served as a source of drinking water for communities downstream, a vital resource for irrigation, and a crucial area for fishing.
So out of sight, out of mind, basically.
Pretty much. This out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach meant that Roman sanitation, for all its ingenuity, primarily moved the problem elsewhere rather than truly treating it or disposing of it safely. It highlights a very different, and by our standards, quite undeveloped understanding of environmental responsibility and the long-term impact of untreated sewage on aquatic ecosystems and public health. They essentially solved the immediate urban filth problem by creating a downstream environmental disaster.
It sounds like there were some very real dangers and even strange, perhaps unsettling beliefs associated with Roman toilets. You mentioned toilet attacks. What exactly were they afraid of?
They absolutely did have these fears. It's a fascinating blend of practical danger and deep-seated superstition. Romans harbored this unusual and, it seems, deeply ingrained fear of what they called toilet attacks. They genuinely believed that evil spirits, malevolent deities, or even demons could rise up through the toilet holes.
Demons in the toilet.
Apparently so. One such feared entity was Stoeculius, a god or demon associated with filth and waste, sometimes invoked maybe in a protective sense to manage the foulness, but also clearly a source of dread. To protect themselves, people would sometimes wear charms, like small phallic amulets, fascinum, or hang them with bells near latrine entrances.
Phallic charms for protection.
Yes, these weren't just for fertility. They were believed to ward off these unwelcome supernatural entities, to avert the evil eye, essentially. It shows this profound integration of practicality, cleanliness concerns, and the pervasive presence of the supernatural in their daily lives, even in the latrine.
And actual explosions in the latrines. That's terrifying to imagine. Was this a common occurrence or just an occasional shocking event?
Indeed, it was a very real and terrifying possibility. The decomposing sewage and accumulated organic matter beneath the public latrines produced this volatile cocktail of flammable gases, methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia.
Right, sewer gas.
Exactly. Occasionally, pressure would build up within the enclosed spaces of the sewer lines beneath the latrines. If a spark was present, maybe from a lamp carried by a user entering a dark space, or even some kind of spontaneous combustion, it could lead to shocking explosions. These could quite literally light a fire under someone or violently blow off the heavy stone lids of a latrine seat.
Good grief.
While probably not a daily occurrence everywhere, historical accounts and archaeological findings suggest these incidents were frequent enough to be a genuine concern. To manage this very real danger, some latrines were designed with ventilation shafts to allow gases to escape, or had domed toilet stones possibly designed to diffuse pressure. Others even burned incense nearby, though the latter probably just added to the already potent mix of smells rather than truly solving the gas problem. These places weren't just sites for relief, they were places of potential sudden peril.
And they even had specific deities associated with their waste systems. That's quite remarkable, reflecting a unique Roman worldview.
It truly is. Rome, like many ancient cultures, didn't always draw sharp distinctions between the sacred and the profane, or the mundane and the divine. They had minor deities specifically associated with aspects of their waste systems, which reflects the perceived importance and maybe even the inherent dangers of these urban necessities.
Like who?
Well, Cloacina, whose name means the purifier, or she who cleanses, presided over the Cloaca Maxima itself. She actually had an ancient shrine, the Sacrum Cloacina, located directly over the main sewer line right in the Roman Forum. This wasn't some obscure cult. It was a recognized public acknowledgement of the divine power associated with the city's primary sanitation artery, signifying the importance of keeping those drains clean and functional.
A goddess of the main sewer. Okay.
And then there was Stercucius, sometimes called Stucius, whose name comes from stercus, the Latin word for dung. He was considered the god of manure and fertilization, linking waste back to agricultural productivity. These deities reflect the Romans' understanding that even the most unsavory or practical aspects of urban life and agriculture required divine oversight and protection. It embodies that very Roman principle of practical piety.
So as the Roman Empire began its long decline, what happened to this impressive yet profoundly flawed sanitation system? Did it simply fall into disrepair, or was there a more complex unraveling?
Unfortunately, it was a gradual and complex unraveling, a clear casualty of the empire's wider decline. During the centuries of the Western Roman Empire's fragmentation and collapse, roughly from the 3rd to the 5th centuries CE and beyond, the grand infrastructure that supported Roman sanitation began to fray dramatically.
How so?
Well, political instability, constant civil wars, invasions, severe economic collapse. All this led to a catastrophic reduction in the public funds and organized labor needed for maintenance. The vast network of aqueducts, which required constant upkeep to prevent blockages, leaks, and structural failure, fell into disrepair in many areas.
So the water supply dwindled.
Exactly. Water flow diminished significantly, crippling those continuous flushing systems in the public baths and latrines. Without that constant flow of water, the whole system starts to break down.
And what was the immediate, tangible consequence of this decline in sanitation for the everyday person living in what used to be Roman cities?
The consequences were stark and immediate. The grand sewers, like the Cloaca Maxima, became increasingly clogged with sediment, debris, accumulated waste, simply due to a lack of regular cleaning and repair. The entire system, which relied on constant upkeep and that vast workforce of often enslaved laborers, just struggled to cope with dwindling resources and the absence of effective centralized management.
So things got messy again.
Very messy. Many of the monumental engineering feats that once managed urban waste became defunct or severely degraded. This led to a significant decrease in public hygiene in many urban centers across what had been the Western Empire during the subsequent centuries, often called the Early Middle Ages or Dark Ages. The once relatively clean Roman cities became, by later standards and certainly by modern ones, far smellier, far more unsanitary, and consequently far more prone to outbreaks of disease. The sophisticated water and waste management systems, once a hallmark of Roman civilization, essentially collapsed in many places, underscoring how vital continuous maintenance and political stability are for urban sanitation and public health. The grand symphony of Roman plumbing faded, and much of the knowledge was lost for centuries.
Looking back, what enduring lessons can we truly take from the Roman approach to waste management? Beyond the obvious discomforts and, frankly, horrors like the shared sponge, what does this deep dive into Roman daily hygiene teach us today?
Well, I think despite all their glaring flaws, and we've covered quite a few, the shared sponges, the ignorance of germ theory, the river pollution, the Roman attempt at large-scale urban sanitation was nothing short of revolutionary for its time. The sheer concept of providing public latrines for thousands of citizens, the monumental engineering of aqueducts to supply those immense volumes of water, and the construction of vast, complex sewer networks like the Cloaca Maxima to carry waste away from the immediate urban core. These were truly groundbreaking endeavors that fundamentally reshaped urban living in the ancient world. And their engineering prowess truly was remarkable, and its legacy continues. Many elements of Roman water management and sewer engineering, things like their robust gravity-fed systems for aqueducts, the durable construction using vaulted arches for sewers, these were so advanced for their era that similar principles and scales of public works weren't widely surpassed in many parts of Europe until the 19th century. That's over 1,000 years later. Yeah. And as we mentioned, sections of the Cloaca Maxima, built over 2.5 millennia ago, are still functioning today as part of modern Rome's drainage system. That's a silent, subterranean testament to the skill and foresight of its original builders, and it demonstrates the profound impact their architectural innovations had on city planning and civic life. But their story also serves as a powerful, albeit often negative, lesson in public health. Their ignorance of germ theory meant that many of their practices were, from our perspective, horrifically unhygienic. The communal tersorium is the most glaring example, almost purpose-built, it seems, for spreading intestinal diseases. The pollution of the Tiber with untreated sewage created a constant health hazard for those downstream. Yet it's clear they knew filth bred sickness, even if they couldn't explain how. It's a stark reminder that impressive engineering alone isn't enough. It must be coupled with scientific understanding to create truly healthy environments.
Right, culturally.
Ah, yes. Socially and culturally, the Roman approach to the toilet offers this fascinating mirror to a very different way of life. That startling lack of privacy in the communal latrines, the ease with which Romans apparently chatted, conducted business, socialized in these spaces. It reveals a culture where community and public life were valued in ways we might find jarring, even incomprehensible today. It shows us how fundamentally different ancient sensibilities were from our own regarding privacy, the body, and shared experience. It's a real lesson in cultural relativism, even for something as basic as going to the bathroom.
Knowing what you do now about how the Romans handled their most personal business, what modern sanitation practice would be the absolute hardest for you to give up? Is it the privacy, the personal cleaning methods, or perhaps our advanced sewage treatment? Think about that for a moment. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, and as always, have a nice day or a good night, and stay safe. See you on the next one.